저는 아시아기후변화교육센터 사무국장을 맡고 있는 김은숙입니다. 반갑습니다. 올해 제14회 국제워크숍은 자연과 사회의 지속가능성을 위한 탄소중립전략이라는 주제로 제주녹색환경지원센터와 공동 주관으로
그래서 이 탄소중립을 달성하기 위해서는 많은 사회 조직체들이 수행해야 될 역할이 다양합니다. 시민단체는 시민단체대로, 정부는 정부대로, 시민은 시민대로 이런 맥락에서 이 자연과 사회의 지속 가능성을 위한 탄소 중립을 전략 이렇게 좀 포괄적으로 이번에 이 워크숍 주제를 정했습니다. 그래서 이 국제 워크숍에서 발표되는 내용이나 이 토론은 아주 귀중하고 값진 조언들이 될 수가 있겠죠. 그러면은 제주특별자치도가 추진하고 있는 2035 기후변화 탄소 중립 기후변화 대응에도 많은 시사점을 줄 생각을 합니다.
My name is Muthuswamy Kumaran. I am a professor at the University of Florida. I came to Jeju from Florida yesterday about the same time. And it's always a joy for me to come back to Jeju. This is my 11th visit to Jeju in the last 10 years. I lived on Jeju for 6 months in 2019 and 2020 for my Fulbright scholarship with the Jeju National University. So every time I come to Jeju, I love Jeju more. Before teaching at the University of Florida, I lived in Hawaii, Honolulu for 4 years. So Jeju is as good as Hawaii, even better than Hawaii. As the title goes, I'm going to talk about carbon neutral strategies, roles and responsibilities of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, to promote sustainable development. In the morning, we had some speakers from policy making, government officials. We had some scientists talk about, some business researchers talk about climate change and carbon neutral strategy. I am a social scientist focusing on civil society and NGOs and how they promote environmental sustainability. I'm also a big environmentalist. I'm a tree hugger. I serve on international NGO board on climate change and environmental justice and so on and so forth. So first of all, I'd like to thank Asia Climate Change Education Center and my mentor, Professor Dayon Jong, for inviting me. So before I start with the PowerPoint, I'd like to set the stage by highlighting some historical watershed moments, right? Historical watershed moments where the world, especially the NGO world, came to understand the concepts and practices and best practices in sustainable development. It was not until 1980, for the first time, we began to hear the term sustainable development. It was coined by IUCN, International Union for the Conservation of Nature, international NGO that focuses on conservation of nature. They came up with the word sustainable development because it was then we saw climate change began to affect the world. So they came up with the sustainable development with 3 main components, right? First of all, social development, people, human development. Second, economic development, businesses, because it's businesses that keep the economic engine going, providing jobs and so on and so forth. Third, Mother Earth, right? Nature, earth, air, and water, okay? So basically what we call 3 Ps, people, profit, planet. Balancing all these 3 are absolutely important. They came up with the sustainable development. That is 1980. 1988, IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, was formed by United Nations. United Nations Environment Program and World Meteorological Society came up with the need for one organization looking at climate change across the world, global climate change, right? And then in 1992, the Agenda 21, for the first time, United Nations came up with the report in Rio de Janeiro, how to practice sustainable development. Okay, so practice of sustainable development. That was in 1992. 2000, United Nations came up with Millennium Development Goal. There were 8 goals. most of the goals were focusing on poverty, hunger, education, healthcare, malnutrition. Only one of those 8 goals focused on protecting nature, nature conservation. Okay? And all these times, climate change was affecting us increasingly. We know that. I'm going to highlight that as we go along. And the final 2 watershed moments are in 2012, we came up with the Sustainable Development Goal. Once again, United Nations, 17 goals. Of the 17, 8 goals focused on protecting nature. Because if you don't protect nature, there were specific goals on protecting marine life, underwater, on earth, and so on, so on, so on, so forth. And then 2015 is when Paris Agreement. That's when we realized we need to cap the rise in temperature at 2 degrees Celsius, limited under 2 degrees Celsius pre-industrial level. Okay? So these are some of the watershed movements that lead to what we do now in carbon neutral strategies. So let me quickly look at the game plan. I have 35 minutes. I'm going to go pretty quick. So I like to start by highlighting the realities of climate change. Okay? What are the causes of climate change and what are the results of climate change? We need to understand at a very clear level before we talk about different strategies. And carbon neutrality is one of the important strategies to address climate change. Okay? I'm going to highlight 12 major roles played by NGOs, especially environmental NGOs. NGOs play hundreds of roles, strategies to address climate change, to involve in carbon neutral strategies, but I'm going to highlight the top 12 roles and strategies NGOs play in addressing climate change through carbon neutrality. And I'm also going to give you 3 examples. There are thousands of NGOs doing that. I'm going to highlight 3 NGOs on how they make the change, the profound impact they made on addressing climate change through carbon neutrality. And then at the end of it, I'll talk a little bit about my conclusion. I've been doing research for more than 20 plus years. I train NGO leaders, including in Jeju. I train NGO leaders that protect Pochawal, Ramsar wetlands, because all these people are important to keep the nature alive and for the future generation. And also I'll give some recommendation on what NGOs need to do moving forward. So this is a quote from United Nations Habitat Program, which focuses on urban development across the world. Okay? So I'm not going to read this. This came about 20 years ago. So basically it says hundreds of millions of people, especially in cities, are going to be severely affected by increasing devastations of climate change. That includes hurricanes, cyclones, drought, forest fire, you name it. So they predicted it 20 years ago now, and we see that happen. So as we all know, climate change is also known as global warming, basically increase in the atmospheric temperature, the ambient temperature. The temperature is heating up. Jeju's weather is not like it used to be 10 years ago. Florida weather is not it used to be 10 years ago. The temperature is going up. Main research, we've been doing a lot of research in the last 20, 30 years. Scientists, climate scientists clearly established emission of greenhouse gases. In the name of development, in the name of industrialization, we are pumping out greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And these gases, as the name goes, trap the heat, which comes back to us, increasing the temperature and so on, so forth. I'll talk a little bit about that. We already seen 1.1, we are almost close to 1.2 plus degrees more than pre-industrial level. Okay? So it has already severe consequences. Just to give an example, 3 weeks ago, Florida, where I live, hit by 2 hurricanes back to back. One was called Hurricane Helene, Category 5. That is the highest, 165 miles speed, destroying coastal areas. I live inland, about 100 miles inside, but still I was affected. I lost power for 30 hours. So climate change is going to hit everybody, no matter where you are. And then to make things worse, 2 weeks later, we were hit by Hurricane Helene, which formed 30 hours ago. 30 hours ago, it was just a storm. Within 30 hours, folks, it became Category 5. That is unbelievable because the ocean was warm, so it was fed by ocean, warm water, and destruction. I know the same thing, especially coastal zones and island communities like Jeju, These are the serious issues we face. If we do not stem the tide of climate change, it's going to affect all of us, entire world, all the humanity, and so on, so on, and so forth. So how serious it is? This was also a report from about 10 years ago. By 2025, that's next year. Next year, they said an average of 375 million people around the world will be directly affected by climate change. That include me losing power for 30 hours. Okay, never before. Now we began to hear words like climate crisis, climate refugees, people who lose their homes, everything, and they have to go to somewhere, some other place, some other country to live. Climate refugees, climate disaster, climate crisis. We also see response, climate action, climate science, and so on, so on, so on, so forth. So we know cities are the major contributors of greenhouse gases. 60% of all carbon dioxide come from cities because of they are the homes for businesses. Many people live there, jobs, and so on, so on, so on, so forth. As a result of that, cities are also worse affected. People overcrowding, when a disaster, climate-related disaster hits, people are really affected. Many people, right? Many people die. Many people lose their homes, and so on, so on, so forth. Erratic, unpredictable. In 30 hours, from storm to hurricane fire. That is the level of seriousness. And we know people are talking. We've been discussing about climate change, lot of meetings, and so on, so forth. It is high time that we take action. The good news is NGOs are already doing that. That's the purpose of my presentation. And quickly, what are the causes? Fossil fuel, right? Gasoline, natural gas, diesel, and so on, so on, so forth. Greenhouse gases, quickly, there are 4 groups of greenhouse gases. The primary gas that's in the greenhouse is CO2, carbon dioxide. 86% of greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, 86%, right? So that's a major contributor. Then methane, 16%. Then nitrous oxide, let me go back. 76% carbon dioxide, 16% methane, 6% nitrous oxide, and the most serious ones are F gases, fluorinated gases. These are only 2%, but they trap heat 1,000 times more than CO2. Okay? So keep that in mind, and we are responsible for almost all of this, and we are responsible for 100% of F gases are man-made. To use in refrigerator, to use in AC, and so 100% it's man-made. So it is, we mess with Mother Nature, and now Mother Nature is messing with us, right? So high time we do something about that. And Paris Agreement, I talked a little bit about Paris Agreement in 2015. The entire world came together and realized we need to stop it less than 2 degrees before more than industrial level. Now we are already closing to 1.3, okay? Although they said 2 degrees, hopefully we will go for 1.5. If you're asking me what's the difference between 1.5 and 2, think about that. Between 1.5 degrees increase in the temperature and 2.0 degrees Celsius, the damage from 70% of the coral reef, it goes to 90%. That means 90% of the coral colonies in the world will be gone. So it's going to affect the marine life. In effect, it's going to marine the entire ecosystem. 1 meter of sea level rise. 1 meter, that's 3.5 feet. At 2 degrees. Think about coastal areas. Think about Jeju. It's interesting, one of the presenters talked about how in 2030, Maldives will achieve net carbon. The problem is, Maldives is only a few meters away from the surface. So 2030, if you achieve 2, Maldives will be underwater. Yes, it achieves its neutrality, but it's gone. The country is gone. And you already see that because of sea level rise, countries are entirely submerging, and so on, so on, so forth. So that's the reality of Paris Agreement. Keep that in mind. So these are the sources of greenhouse gases. As you can see, this is naturally coming from forest, because all plants, all trees breathe carbon dioxide out just like us. But the difference is they also take the carbon back for photosynthesis and for food. We don't. We only send the carbon dioxide out, and so on and so forth. As industries, carbon dioxide, methane comes from cattle, animals. right? Some of them are nature, some of them are most of them are man-made, transportation and so on and so forth. I'm not even including the F gases here. Like I said, that's the most dangerous consequence of climate change. Now what happens? We all know this, higher temperature, shrinking glaciers, Antarctica and the Arctic glaciers. We are talking about huge pieces of ice the size of South Korea, the size of Jeju, disappearing in few weeks, gone. Where will they go? All the water goes into the sea, sea level rises. Another serious part is, it is the glaciers that keep the weather pattern in the world balanced. Okay, so when the glacier is gone, it is going to mess up the global weather pattern altogether. All these things going to cause serious threats to wildlife that is living in the forest. So marine life is affected, forest life is affected. So coastal areas continuously hit by inland flooding, too much rain, and inland areas continuously hit by drought, no rain at all. Forest fires, right? We see in the newspaper, right, in Australia, thousands and thousands acres of forest fire, gone in 1 week, completely wiped out. So all the wildlife is going to die, serious. Many of them are going extinct, gone forever. So we need to do something about it, and these are some of the consequences. I'm not going to show both underwater as well as on land and up in the air. It's going to affect us all. I mean, we see that. Now let me go into the carbon neutrality side of the presentation. So we know 76% of the greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide. So where do they come from? 26% energy. That includes keeping the AC, keeping the light, all these things. 13% transportation. That is the car we drive, the bus we take, and the flight we take, everything together 13%. Residential building, the home we live, and commercial building 8%. Industries, 18%, 19%. Agriculture, these two were constant. They were already there ever since the beginning of humanity. All these things are new. So that's what's increasing the ambient temperature as we talked about Paris Agreement. Now, this shows the seriousness of that 1.5. That's the magic number. We hope, let's hope to keep the increase at 1.5. But look at this number. This is very serious. This is from World Resources Institute. They say if we need to keep the rise in temperature under 1.5 by Paris Agreement, we can send out carbon dioxide only 510 gigaton. That is 510 billion tons of carbon every year. But we are already sending close to 800. So look at the projection, 850. That means if we continue to drive the car, if the planes fly, if we still use the AC, we are going to hit 850. So that means what? 1.5 is impossible. In 2-3 years, it's going to go up. And let's hope, really let's hope, we won't go to the drastic level of 2.0. Because I mentioned, if 2.0, that means it's going to be very serious and so on and so forth. Now, what is carbon neutrality? As the name goes, we emit carbon, and carbon neutrality is the balance of removing the carbon from atmosphere through various methods. The main method is carbon sinks. Forests, oceans, seas, earth, all are natural carbon sinks. The problem is we are cutting the forest down for development and so on and so forth. So we are actually eliminating the carbon sinks. So that is one source. We also have removal of carbon, right? Let's remove the carbon from atmosphere and store it underground. It's a little bit tough, but it can be done and so on and so forth. Any way we do it, we absolutely must reduce carbon emissions, otherwise we are going to hit 2.0 even beyond that. So that's a brief video I'm going to play that explains what is carbon neutrality. Just 2 minutes.
Energy we consume for waste management. The way we produce and consume based on the use of fossil fuels such as oil, coal or natural gas leaves a negative footprint on the planet. Carbon neutrality reduces the negative impact on the environment to achieve a net result of zero emissions. But how is it reached? First, with measures that reduce energy consumption as much as possible. Improve energy efficiency. Innovation in low-carbon technology. Increase the consumption of electricity from renewable sources and eliminate the use of fossil fuels that cause climate change. In short, emit fewer greenhouse gases. Today, it is still impossible to achieve zero emissions in many of our activities. Only when we cannot reduce our emissions of greenhouse gases, we will compensate them. How? Using carbon markets, where the sale of credits and rights between countries, organizations and individuals take place in order to fulfill the agreement reached at the Climate Summit in Paris. Climate change is a global problem. We must think of global emissions to act efficiently and economically. Reducing and helping others to reduce is the same. In addition, many of the projects generated by the owners of these loans have a social and environmental component that contribute to sustainability. Summarizing, the way we consume energy is the main contributor to climate change, and carbon neutrality helps to change our habits and includes emissions reduction and renewable energy growth. In short, it is a responsible attitude to the environment that contributes to sustainable development.
All right. So hopefully that explained in video quickly about carbon neutrality. Now, I'm not going to spend much time on that. These are some of the terminology because sometimes people confuse what is carbon neutrality versus neutral strategies versus carbon credit and so on and so forth. Many other speakers have already covered that. I think we have one speaker who's going to talk about pollutions, polluters pay, carbon trading, but I'm going to skip that. But I'd like to highlight carbon footprint. All of us on Earth have our own carbon footprint. That means the emission that we cause, whether it's driving our car, whether it's keeping the AC on, we all contribute to carbon emission. All the countries contribute to carbon emission. All the companies contribute to carbon emission. So the baseline data is we need to understand how much each of us, how much Jeju, right? We talked about how Jeju has a very ambitious plan, 2035, net carbon zero. Right? It's an ambitious plan, but I'm so glad Jeju government already has several successful stories on doing that. But all of us need to understand our role, our carbon footprint. Okay, all organizations have carbon footprint. Samsung has its own carbon footprint. Google and all those things. That is a baseline. We need to have a clear understanding on how much we are contributing to the emission. Then we need to look at how to neutralize that. Okay, so that's the bottom line. Now let me go through the 12 roles. Like I said, there are hundreds of roles, but these 12 roles are the most important by which NGOs play carbon neutral strategies in addressing climate change. Let's start with the first one, environmental conservation, which is the domain of NGOs. Yes, the governments also have national parks, right? City parks, but when you look at environmental conservation on a global scale, it is done by NGOs, especially environmental NGOs like Culture Protection, and so on, so on, so forth. So they do it both in the marine world as well as land-based. Okay, so some of the strategies, Land Trust. In fact, there is a set of non-profits called Land Trust. I sit on the board of a Land Trust, a small land trust. But we conserved 88,000 acres of land in the last 30 years. The organization started 30 years ago. We already protected 88,000 acres of land. Nobody can touch these lands. My daughter and her daughter, the carbon sink. We protect the carbon sink, number one. Second, we are creating the environment for the enjoyment of future generation, unborn generation. It is our responsibility to leave Mother Earth for children who are not born yet, who will be born 100 years from now, right? We cannot destroy everything and let them struggle. So environmental NGO do that. Coastal management. I do a lot of work in Belize. Belize is a Central American country. Belize is beautiful because 70% of the country is forest covered. It's a small country, And Belize also has the second longest barrier reef in the world. It's called Mesoamerican Barrier Reef, next only to Great Australian Barrier Reef. It's a treasure for the world, not just for Belizean. They have a unique arrangement because Belize is a poor country, so government cannot provide protect the marine system because they don't have the expertise, they don't have the money. So hundreds and hundreds of NGOs, they work with the government in a process called co-management. That means government tells them, okay, you can protect this marine coral colony, bunch of islands, coral islands. So these NGOs protect them with their resources, they raise money, they have skills and so on and so forth. So even government failed to do NGOs protect the important treasures of humanity, not just for Belize. And NGOs also provide environmental movement. They educate people. They involve everybody. Everybody's in this, especially climate change is universal. Everybody must be part of that, and NGOs do that through environmental campaigns and environmental movements. Second, internalizing carbon neutrality in their everyday operation. By that I mean there are roughly about 20 million NGOs in the world, around the world. 1.5 million in the US. US has the largest non-profit sector. So it is growing. Korea, 10 years ago, had only slightly more than 10,000 NGOs registered. Now it's almost 16,000. So it is growing. What happens when an NGO becomes a large NGO? It's going to hire more people, employees, and they're going to drive cars, and they're going to have a building, there is lights, electricity. So they need to be very mindful about what they are doing to neutralize carbon emission. And the good news is many NGOs, especially environmental NGOs, take it very seriously. They are very careful about how much their carbon footprint, and they carefully decide. That's why if they cannot do it, how can they go and tell others to be carbon neutral, right? So they have to internalize, first they have to lead by example. Third, collecting, analyzing, and informing data sets. United Nations is a transnational organization. They collect data globally, but those data are hardcore science. Ordinary people, community people, right? I lived in Hallim, right? People, the fisher folks in Hallim don't understand climate data. So NGOs take the data and disaggregate them to individual communities so people can understand how this is going to affect me living in Hallim. You see how governments don't do that. So even Intergovernmental Panel does not do that. It is the NGOs that take the data and make people, inform people about the seriousness and what they're going to. Next, yes, you know the data, you know the seriousness of it, and what is the solution? NGOs have the technical knowledge, environmental NGOs, on solution to carbon neutrality, solution to climate change. Not only to communities, but also businesses, also governments. Okay? So collecting the data, synthesizing the data, and providing solution to the issues. Advocacy. Advocacy is when NGOs talk to government officials, bureaucrats, elected officials, ministers, chief minister, presidents, informing them about the community issue, because NGOs know the pulse of the community better than the government or businesses. So advocacy is informing the policy making body, helping the policy making, environmental policy making, and so on and so forth. Once again, Jeju has an amazing environmental process where people can participate, and so on and so forth. Next is awareness building, telling the people. This goes back to the collection of data, now informing the people using those data so people can understand what is my carbon footprint, what can I do to address the carbon footprint. I can do something. I don't need to take 20 minutes of hot shower, maybe 10 minutes. I don't need to keep my temperature 72 degrees Fahrenheit when it's so hot outside, maybe 75. So I'm doing something, because when you tell them about climate change, that is too much. That is too much. I said, oh, I cannot do that. But if they tell me to control my carbon footprint, that can be done. Action. You actually promote action. You can study everything, but if you don't act, nothing is going to happen. NGOs do that. And they also promote public participation. It is important that all of us understand, all of us participate in the policy, not just the policymakers, not just the elected officials, not the bureaucrats. we have to be involved in the policy making process, especially carbon emission and greenhouse gas emission. Carbon offsetting. NGOs do not have much resources. I'll talk about that in the next slide. But they support carbon sequestration by providing technical assistance to businesses and governments and so on, so on, so forth. As you can see, NGOs play a very important role, leading role in carbon neutrality and so on and so forth. Watchdog, this is another important role NGOs play. By this, NGOs make sure if the government agree to do it, the government comes up with the environmental policy, NGOs make sure they implement the policies. If the businesses agree not to pollute or do whatever it is to protect, if they don't do it, if they continue to pollute, NGOs are monitoring them and informing the people through media, social media, public media, and so on and so forth, mass media, and so on and so forth. So this is an important role NGO play, watchdog role, meaning making sure others are following what they say they are doing. Active role in carbon trade. This is a controversial area. Many NGOs are not for carbon trading because they think by allowing businesses to carbon trade, we are telling them, okay, you can pollute as long as you pay money. In fact, last week I read a report from Greenpeace International, an international environmental NGO, but very aggressive. They do amazing work, but they are very strong. They said we will not support any of the carbon trade. But in my personal opinion, that's not good because businesses are here and NGOs are here. You cannot bring it together right away. So we have to take baby steps to bring it. So carbon trade, some NGOs are actively playing in carbon negotiation, so on and so forth. Environmental governance. There is a term called environmental justice. Unfortunately, climate change and any other environmental disaster affects poor people more than rich people. Because poor people usually they live in marginalized land. Already they are poor health, but disaster makes things worse. So it's called environmental justice. It's an injustice actually for poor people and also ethnic, racial people, and aboriginal people, native people, okay? So environmental NGOs play a governance role. That means collective decision making. They bring businesses, they bring individual communities, they bring government, everybody, let's plan so there is a balance in environmental justice. So these are the 12 major roles NGOs play. There are many more, but these 12 are most important. Let me quickly give you some example. I'm running out of time. One example is Green Building Council. I'm sure you all heard about LEED certification. LEED stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. This is for building. Earlier we looked at 8% of carbon dioxide emission comes from commercial and residential building. So this NGO focuses on how to make a green building by giving certification. They actually train people, they go inspect, and they provide recommendations to make them energy efficient, including solar panels, reducing their AC, and so on, so forth. Making natural light coming instead of closing everything and taking the lights on, and so on, so forth. It's an amazing organization. Look at some numbers. I'm not going to go through the details, but they are operating in 187 countries. But this is a small drop in the bucket. That means they have a lot of work to do, but they do very important job in certifying green buildings. So many businesses now take it seriously to get certified because it's part of the corporate social responsibility, corporate environmental responsibility. The second organization called One Tree Planted, straight name, let's plant one tree, because trees are carbon sinks, okay? And obviously they don't just plant one tree, they are planting millions and millions of trees, especially in countries where deforestation, Brazil, Amazon, gone. So they go and build millions and millions of trees, and they raise money, they work with local NGOs, communities, and do that. They also have urban forestries. You know, when I flew to Jeju, Jeju is green. Every house has a small cabbage patch, like citrus. But if you look at major cities, especially in developing countries, no greenery. We cut everything down to build and so on and so forth. So they promote urban forestry. They go with trees and give people free trees and plant them and so on and so forth. They also help children, catch them young, giving awareness of when they are children and so on and so forth. I've given the PowerPoint, I've given the website information. When you get a chance, take a look at them. they do tremendous work in carbon neutrality. Final example, one of my most favorite environmental NGO, the Nature Conservancy. Okay? The entire organization focuses on tackling climate change. That is their main mission. And they do this through they actually come up with global climate impact report. Everybody's watching. When Nature Conservancy is releasing, governments are watching, NGOs are watching, businesses are watching, because they do such a elaborate scientific data, collect the information, and so on and so forth. They also do all these things to make sure carbon neutrality is achieved, climate change will become, controlling climate change will become a reality. Now, quickly, yes, they are doing tremendous work with tremendous impact, but there are several challenges. First one, NGOs don't collaborate with each other. I train NGOs. I train more than 3,000 NGOs in six countries, including 125 NGOs in Korea. They don't work with each other, right? If they work with each other, they can maximize the resources, right? Many of them duplicate the services, the same service. So it's a no-brainer, they come together. So that's a major challenge. Money, always NGOs need more money, okay? And they're conflicting goals. Even environmental NGOs, different goals that sometimes conflict. They cannot work, they cannot bring major impact to the local communities. They do important work, but they do not inform the other NGOs, other communities, so they can be replicable, right? They have best practices, but they need to inform others so other communities can follow that. So that's a major challenge. Urban and rural areas. Many NGOs focus only on the urban area, very few NGOs in rural area. As you know, 55%, almost 55% of the population in the world live in cities. That means what? More than 40% live in rural areas, but most NGOs are only in urban area, very few in rural area. So there's no balance of helping those people. As I mentioned, they have promising practice, but they cannot be replicated unless they make it simple, and so on, so forth. Now, in concluding, we know for sure things are going to get worse. We are going to go past that 1.5, and we are going to go closer to 2. You know what will happen. There's going to be, I gave you an example of within 2 weeks, 2 major hurricanes in Florida. I'm inside. It's going to affect us all, especially in island communities like Jeju, right? Very vulnerable for all these things. And NGOs are in the forefront, like I said, environmental movement. Yes, governments do important work. Jeju government is doing an important work, including this conference. Businesses need to take responsibility, but NGOs will continue to be in the forefront, and they need to be, this is everything that I covered in the last session. They should not, they should come together, they should focus together, they should work with businesses and government as partners in this development. They cannot antagonize, they cannot be against, and so on and so forth. So challenges also present opportunities. Earlier I mentioned PPP, people, profit, planet. Now that has changed. Planet comes first, people come next, profit goes later, right? It is absolutely high time that we focus on protecting Mother Earth. It is our responsibility, your responsibility, everybody's responsibility. If you do not do that through carbon neutral and other strategies, things are going to be dire. Okay, I hate to stop with a very pessimistic view, but that's the reality. I'm a social scientist. I tell the truth, and so on and so forth. But let's hope the world will wake up. All of us take our responsibility seriously. All of us understand our carbon footprint and what can I do to address it, not what can somebody else do, and so on and so forth. 감사합니다.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eunjung. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce myself. I work in the Vice Chair of Training Research Community Group in the UNSCAP WMO, and also I work in the Korean Media Administration. Today I'm very happy and very honored to stand here for discuss about the climate change and the carbon. So I'm a meteorologist and I'm a scientist. I'm not a social scientist. So today I want to introduce about the carbon and the climate change. And I think as a Jeju, people can understand and familiar with this figure. This one is I took in the Kidang Art Center in Seoul City. This paint is painted by the local paintist Hyun Shi-ji. The first figure is a sunny day. The sun is here, and the ocean is very calm, and all the fishermen and his horse is very spend his very peaceful time before coming the storm. And second figure is before the coming storm. So you can see in the white waves in the oceans, in the Southeast Ocean, and also the horse and all the fishermen hair is shaking, a little bit shaking by the typhoon. The last figure one is a stormy day. It's coming, and the Southeast pole is inside of the tropical cyclone here. So you can see the very white wave and very shaking in the trees and the hairs. So this is a very meaningful figure from the sunny day coming before the typhoon, and in the middle of the typhoon in the Southeast Pacific. Okay, so I move to the next slide. Just one. Yeah. This one is the very scientific report. The tropical cyclone and the typhoon is changed every year. So we have recorded since 1951. The highest year and the lowest typhoon frequency. So the first grade, the 1967, we have a 39 as a typhoon. But however, 2010, we only have a 14. So 1/3 of the 1967. However, this year in 2024, up to 25 October, we have a 21 typhoon. The 21 typhoon is called in the code name. Is now activated, and they moved to the Philippines. The KMA is forecasted that this typhoon, 21st typhoon, will move to Korean Peninsula or not. So they think the analysis of the track and intensity and the tropical is wind. So when you look at this table, then we have the largest and the lowest. So the frequency of the typhoon is changed every year. Also, the frequency and intensity also changed every year. So this is very interesting in seismology. It's the original typhoon. So our ancestor, how think about the tropical cyclone to our society? As you well know that our society is agricultural society, agricultural industrial society. So therefore, the wind and heavy rainfall is very important for the agriculture, especially the large scale. So tropical cyclone has two different point of view. So meteorological view is also the scientific, have a severe wind and heavy rainfall. But in the historical view, the tropical cyclone means a fear, and disasters, means disasters. So our old ancestors, they described and they remain recorded wind and heavy rainfall of Korean history books. From the AD 49 to 90, it's a Samguk Shide. We can find a very meaningful, useful record from our historical book. Especially AD 5062, this the governmental official in the Joseon dynasty, they describe and like every day like diary. It's a diary. So we call it the Sinjongwon Ilgi. We can find a very unique and very important record from the heavy rainfall and precipitation and severe wind recording here. So do you know when we use the typhoon? Unfortunately, the Japanese colonial times, Japanese meteorologists introduced the typhoon. So we call in the typhoon from the Japanese colonial times. This one is the Punggi. So this Punggi is the observatory instrument, wind direction and wind speed. You can see in the flag. It's a red flag. Wind, it's a day shaking with the wind. And this one is very famous. Everybody know about this one. It's a chugugi. It's a rain gauge. So this pungi and chugugi is an observatory instrument, measured wind and the rain gauge developed by the King Sejong in Joseon Dynasty. So when you look at this wind and rainfall gauge, our ancestors very important of the wind and the rain gauge for the agricultural society. When you look at the Western historical book, so where is the typhoon from? Where is the typhoon? So typhoon, the Roman Greek myths, the ancient Greek and the Romans, they typhoon like this one. So they have lots of the small snake and a big snake with the legs. This we call this typhoon. So typhoon comes from this typhoon. We call about these typhoons. Okay? So everybody know about the Sara. So the famous and worst typhoon in Korean in our nations. The Sara is very famous and worst in our Korean history. The tribe of the Sara generated the eastern warm ocean from the Philippines. They travel to the Taiwan, Okinawa, and they stay a little bit and they change the direction toward between the Korea and the Japan Peninsula. And this Sara attacked Busan, especially the Busan and the Kyushu Island. So you can see the many disasters from the broken train, leg, and the strained fishing boat and the crash of the house. The Typhoon Sara was the worst and struck the Korean Peninsula in the 50 years. And the peak wind in the South Korea was 169 kilometers per hour, which was the highest for a typhoon at the time. Especially during 15 to 18 in September, we call it the Chuseok, it's fall in the harvest day, full moon day. The Sara is hit the Busan, especially Busan area. The damage was heaviest at Busan where the storm strikes. And nationwide, this type is destroyed over the 14,000 homes and left lots of people homeless and causing the 100 million in damage. At least almost 700 people was killed in the South Korea. So as you know that in 1959, this is just a 9-year phase after the Korean War. So the infrastructure of the Korean nationwide was totally destroyed at the times. So now we are go to the meteorological and the scientific point of view. So many researchers and meteorologists define what is a tropical cyclone and the typhoon. So World Meteorological Organization defined as a tropical cyclone has a warm core, non-frontal system, and originating over the tropical and the subtropical waters, organized in convection. The typhoon has like this, like a satellite and cloud. So you can see here is eye is a typhoon eye, and have a wind spiral. So they look at like some very massive cloud mass. So this tropical cyclone generated almost very hot and warm water in the oceans. So the green small dot is the genesis point of the tropical cyclone, and the color is the sea surface temperature distributions. The red color means warmer than 25. When you look at this map, this tropical cyclone generated red color areas, especially especially in the red color, it's very hot. We call it very warm water. Also, tropical cyclone has their unique names. For example, typhoon is a tropical cyclone generated in the western North Pacific. Hurricane means generated east and western is the Atlantic. Cyclone is generated in the Indian Ocean and the Southern Hemisphere oceans. So when you look at this map, the genesis point of the tropical cyclone will match the warm water in here. So also very active, the Western North Pacific, we live in this area, so very active tropical cyclone region. This one is very interesting figures. So now we are living in the climate change, and everybody experience very hot and very severe heat wave in the summer. So in summer, very hot and very difficult to live in the summer days. This one is one of the temperature change in geological age. So we call it the Quaternary and the Cenozoic. So we are living the present in here. Now we are in the interglacial period. We have 4 glacial period and 3 interglacial period. So the temperature distribution in the glacial temperature is very low, but in a while the interglacial temperature is high. But this moment is a little very high. It's recorded very high temperature. This one is the map of the last ice age since 18,000 years ago. The white one is land, the black one is oceans. Our old ancestors can travel on foot from the China to across the Korean Peninsula and reach Japan, some part of Japan. So China, Korea, and Japan was one continental in the 18,000 years ago. But however, we are now here is the Western Ocean, here is the Eastern Ocean. So now we are the continental is a divided ocean and continent. So global temperature anomaly since the 1880s, since this is the first industrial revolution in England. From after that, the global temperature is very rapidly increased. Especially 2020, the temperature anomaly recorded 1 and 1.5 is warmer than is 1880s. So what is the contributors to this rapidly increased temperature anomaly? The researchers and climatologists reported the 2 factors. The first one is natural variability, and one is anthropogenic. Anthropogenic we call in the 6 major greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide, as mentioned, is Professor Kumara, also methane, and these 6 major greenhouse gases make a warm and hot temperature in global world. So very interesting figure also. The sea surface temperature anomaly is changed from the 90s and 2020s. The black box is wormhole region. Here is the very famous Typhoon generation point. Philippines in here, is Okinawa in here, is Korea in here. So black box is a very warm area. The sea surface temperature warmer than 26 and 27. This is Genesis area of Typhoon. But this, when you look at it, it's 19th, and here is almost a blue color. But now we have a warm color, red color. So SST also changed it before compared to the 30 years ago. So the global temperature and the sea surface temperature is changed rapidly in this region. This one is very famous papers, scientific papers reported by the question is American scientists. The global increase in major tropical cyclone. He is examining the tropical cyclones. Especially in the Western North Pacific, tropical cyclone is very intense. And also many the oceans also moved to the very intense. So the tropical cyclone intensity intensified with the time. And this one is the strongest tropical cyclone in the satellite records. Especially in the 2013, the Haiyan and Irma in 2017, and Gilbert in 1988. In this year, the Typhoon Yagi is hit the Philippines and Taiwan and Vietnam. Also, Hurricane Milton struck the Florida the last week. Is it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So this one is one of the example. Is the strongest typhoon in our area, Haiyan, 2013. This one is moved through the center of the Philippine area. So this one is the before landfall of this typhoon. You can see the city light in here. The Tacloban is a very famous tour site. But however, after the landfall, we cannot find the city tour in here because the Tacloban is destroyed by this typhoon. So typhoon is a very destructive, caused these disasters every year. So I just skip about this one. Harvey moved to 2017 is moved to the Mexico, Gulf of the Mexico, and strike in Texas and Florida. They destroyed the oil company in this region, also Irma. And another example is Amphan. They strike about the Indian Ocean and the Bangladesh in the Indian continent and the Myanmar. Also, they caused very severe disasters at the time. Everybody know about them. You know, who is he? He is Vice President of Al Gore. He is a winner of the Nobel Prize in 2006. They contributed climate change. You can see the inconvenient truth. Here is the liberty of the Statue of Liberty, and is the bomb of the bomber team in the hurricane. Al Gore is very contributed about the prevented climate change. So in this background, the TICA expert team, our is the WMO expert team, has published a scientific report in 1979. This is the published by the expert team. So I'm one of the members of this team. So the assessment impact of climate change and tropical cyclone in the typhoon community region. This scientific report prevented and the service provided some scientific basis for our region. Okay, so I want to summarize of the key findings in here. And I would like to summarize the TC frequency and TC intensity, and frequency and proportion of very intense typhoon and the TC precipitation. Especially is the TC intensity is very intense in our region. Also, the genesis point is moving northward, north and inlandward. So we have to preparing the future work. So I'm summarizing this slide. Please refer in my slide in detail. So I'm sorry, I didn't keep in my time. So if you have some questions, please ask it to me. Thank you. Thank you for kind my attention. Thank you.
My name is Daisat Kirfani, so I'm an assistant professor at Kenyong University. I have been in Korea for 14 years, but unfortunately my Korean level is basic. So I received my PhD from Seoul National University in biological engineering. But I did actually my undergraduate and master in marine biology. And now I'm working in the Department of Biology, but my work actually focuses on microbial ecology and mainly studying the effect of human activities on the environment from a microbial perspective. So today I'm going to talk about the carbon, blue carbon ecosystems as key, for carbon neutrality and the climate actions. So actually, Professor Kumaran already explained it. So what is carbon neutrality? So simply is actually to make a balance between the carbon that we actually emit into the atmosphere and the carbon that it's absorbed by the sinks. So why does carbon neutrality matter? So actually it matters for both nature and society. So first for nature, so the carbon neutrality helps to reduce the greenhouse gases. So by reducing the amount of carbon and other harmful gases from the atmosphere. Also it helps to mitigate the climate change and prevent the global warming by stabilizing the balance of carbon and also slowing down the rise of the temperature. And also it helps to protect the ecosystems, so by reducing the harmful emission and safeguarding the biodiversity. But also it matters for the society as it promotes healthier community through reducing the air pollution, and so then actually promoting a good public health, and also it supports the long-term economic growth by actually encouraging innovation in green energy and clean energy and green industry and sustainable practice. And therefore, we can actually ensure sustainable future for the next generation. So also Professor Komaran already explained it, so the emission and sinks of carbon dioxide. So just simply here, this figure shows actually the emissions and sinks of carbon dioxide. So first, the biggest carbon source are humans, so we are actually the one that produce the major source of this carbon through for example, burning the fossil fuels, through actually deforestation, cutting down the forest and then reducing this carbon sink. But actually there are actually other carbon sinks, so this excess of carbon dioxide, it's absorbed in the carbon sinks, like for example the soil can store actually important amount of carbon. Also the forests, so they are an important carbon sink, so they can store lots of carbon, but because of the deforestation, this forest can become actually a source of carbon. And the biggest carbon sink is actually the ocean, that I will focus on aquatic, carbon sink. So the ocean is the biggest carbon sink. So it's the largest active carbon sink on Earth, so the ocean can absorb until 35% of the anthropogenic carbon dioxide emission. So here in this figure, so we can see from the left to the right, so here actually the different blue carbon ecosystem or blue carbon sinks. So we have the mangroves, the salt marsh, and the seagrass. And so we can see the fate of the carbon, so in this blue carbon ecosystem. So the green arrows show the carbon that is captured via photosynthesis, and this carbon can also be sequestered in the woody biomass as well as in the soil. So this is the red arrows, and the carbon actually is lost again. Part of this carbon is lost again into the atmosphere through respiration. So the black arrows. And so this figure shows actually examples of the carbon storage, the carbon storage ecosystem on Earth. So this carbon storage, actually the amount of carbon that is absorbed by this ecosystem depends on this actually carbon storage sinks. So to achieve neutrality, actually it depends on this carbon storage. So as we said, for example, we can see that the forest, different types of forest can absorb the carbon. So the forest can absorb about 50 gigatons of carbon every year, but around 8 gigatons of this carbon leaks back into the atmosphere due to the deforestation, fire, and other disturbance. And here also this figure shows that the wetland are actually they are significant reservoirs of carbon, so they store more carbon than other terrestrial ecosystem. So despite that this wetlands occupy only between 5 to 8% of the land surface of the Earth, they hold actually between 20 to 30% of the all estimated carbon. So this wetland ecosystem cover also just 1% of the ocean floor, but they can store up to 10 times more than actually per unit, area, more than terrestrial forest. So, and the carbon that is captured by this wetland is what is called the blue carbon. And so examples of this wetland, like the mangroves and salt marsh. So simply the blue carbon is the carbon that is captured by this ecosystem, but by this coastal and marine ecosystem. So like the salt marshes, mangroves, seagrass, and kelp forest. So this is what is meant by blue carbon, is the carbon that is stored by the blue ecosystem, which are actually the aquatic ecosystem, so including the wetlands and the marine ecosystem. So I will talk about examples of this blue carbon ecosystem. And so this, I will focus mainly on the salt marshes, seagrass, and mangroves, which are the best understood marine ecosystem for their adaptation and mitigation. As I said, they can store actually a huge amount of carbon. So we start with the salt marsh. So the salt marsh, which actually are ecologically important. So they support a high biodiversity. They also protect the shoreline from the erosion. They also protect the shoreline from the floods by absorbing the rainwater and also slowing down the speed. Also, this salt marsh actually they improve the water quality through the filtration of the water runoff from the urban area, and also of course they can sequester actually the carbon. But the problem, that these salt marsh are actually declining. So for example, between 2000 and 2009, the world lost about 1,500 square kilometers of salt marsh, which is actually twice the size of Singapore. And this loss is about 0.3% per year. So example of the salt marsh that are lost, for example, in the UK, so the salt marsh area has declined by 85% due to the coastal development. Also in South Korea, salt marshes are actually affected, and so they significantly declined, especially with the reclamation project that caused the loss of about 40,000 hectares of tidal flats, including the salt marshes. So that's why it's important to protect these actually salt marshes. Then the seagrass also is another blue carbon ecosystem, and is an important also ecosystem. They also provide actually a critical habitat for a diverse aquatic living organism. And also they provide coastal protection by stabilizing the sediments and also reducing the erosion by reducing the energy from the waves. Also the seagrass, so they are actually plants, so they actually capture the carbon dioxide and release the oxygen as byproduct. And so this oxygen is vital for the survival of the marine organism. And also, so it captures and sequesters the carbon. So globally, the seagrass habitat also have been declined, so with about 30 to 50% loss in the past century. And for example, in Korea, the seagrass has declined by between 70 to 80% since the beginning of the industrial development during the 1970s. And so the main cause of this declining of the seagrass, of course, human activities, including dredging, fishing, along with the climate change. But in Korea, another major factor, which is the reclamation as said, that caused the decline of the seagrasses. For example, a large Zostera marina bed and the Nakdong River estuary in Busan vanished just after the mud floods were reclaimed in the late of 1980s for ports and industrial constructions. So this seagrass habitat needs conservation, management and restoration, and some actually countries started taking actions, like in the USA, in Virginia, 2 square kilometers of seagrass were seeded, and they expanded to 36 square kilometers. Also, Korea is making actually effort to restore the seagrasses. There are some efforts of the seagrass habitat restoration have been also carried out recently, especially on the south coast of Korea. So then the mangroves, which is another example of blue carbon ecosystem. So these mangroves, so they have evolved to be able to survive in such harsh conditions. So in the flooded coastal environments where seawater actually meets so the fresh water. So the mangroves, so which are actually trees, that 70% of these trees is underwater and 30% above water. So these mangroves are also important, so they support diverse wildlife, so from birds, fish, invertebrates and different other species. They also act as a natural barrier to protect the coastal communities from extreme weather events, so they can protect the communities from storms, and also they contribute to improve the water quality, so through the filtration of pollutant and excess of nutrients, so from runoff, and also they sequester the carbon, so in both actually in the structure of the tree itself and also in their substrate. So these mangroves cover about 0.5% of the global coastal area and about 0.7% of the tropical forest cover, but they serve as a significant carbon sink, so they can store carbon up to 5 times per area than tropical forest. So these mangroves can sequester over 2 tons of carbon per hectare each year. So this figure shows actually the ecosystem carbon storage, between boreal, temperate and tropical forest and the mangroves, and we can see that the mangroves can store much carbon than does actually the forest. So these mangroves also, they are actually declining, and mainly due to the deforestation that causes the carbon causes carbon emissions, so more carbon will be emitted, and so it reduces the storage capacity. So for example, there is between 30 to 50 decline in the mangroves area over the past century that raises concerns, that they could functionally disappear in 100 years. So if we continue like this, we'll probably in 100 years we'll lose these mangroves, and then we will lose a carbon sink. And over 60% of mangroves, they were destroyed between 2000 and 2024. So that's why restoration is widely needed for this ecosystem. So last year, in Jeju, there was actually a workshop about preserving and enhancing the mangroves. The event aimed to connect researchers that study coastal ecosystem and carbon sequestration. So in order to find or to examine the potential to mangrove species from Indonesia to be grown on Jeju. So Jeju actually is taking action to restore the mangroves, forest, by implanting mangroves from Indonesia. And here, the president of the National Institute of Forest Science, of South Korea, said that in the next 50 years, Korea should go beyond terrestrial forests, which are called the green carbon, to pay attention to the forests of the sea, such as the mangroves and coastal wetlands, which are blue carbon. So here the president is encouraging about actually taking more attention to this blue carbon ecosystem, to mitigate the climate change, because this actually ecosystem feature ability to absorb and fix the carbon while actually providing other benefits for the people. And another blue carbon ecosystem, which are the marine habitats, this is a marine ecosystem, they consist of calcified red algae, and this marine habitat also, they have ability to sequester the carbon. So as this algae grows, they can incorporate the carbon into their structure, and then they can store the carbon in their structure. And also, this marine habitat, they filter the organic matter and the sediments from the water, and as these decompose, they contribute to the carbon storage in their substrate. So in many of these ecosystems actually are designated as a marine protected area. Unfortunately, so trawling and dredging are allowed in most of these areas, and these are actually affecting and damaging so this ecosystem. We'll see here actually a short video about the scallop dredging. So we can see that the dredging actually to collect the scallop, but at the same time it actually destroys so this marine beds, and so then they destroy so this actually blue carbon sink. So that's why, as Professor Komaran talked about, so the Paris Agreement and the rise of the temperature, so we cannot actually reach Paris Agreement if we don't take urgent action on the ocean and this blue carbon ecosystem. So if you want to keep actually the temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius compared to the pre-industrial level, so we have to give more attention to the blue carbon ecosystem. Through directing financial support away from activities that damage the ocean, also shield at least 30% of the ocean through fully or highly protected marine protected area, and also high sea treaty are needed for the half of the planet that is unprotected, and also actively restore the marine habitat to help recover marine life and increase the carbon sequestration. So that's why recognizing the value of blue carbon stocks is crucial for marine biodiversity conservation, and also to achieve carbon neutrality for sustainable nature and society. We can see here the example of Scotland, during the Scottish Blue Carbon Forum about the blue carbon. For example, in Scotland, they have about 14 billion pounds of coastal buildings and infrastructure that are protected by natural defenses. So they are protected by example the salt marshes, and these salt marshes they can sequester about 25,000 tons of carbon each year. So we can see here that this blue carbon they can mitigate the climate change, and by actually sequestering the carbon, and at the same time they provide other benefits like protecting the buildings. So all countries actually they should take this example to mitigate the climate change. So managing the blue carbon is important because this habitat can help actually adapt and mitigate to the climate change, while actually providing thousands and lots of benefits to people. So policymakers, coastal communities and industries, they should invest in this natural solution by preserving them and enhancing this natural solution in order to live sustainably. And thank you for your attention.
After that, I thought about how to do it, and it's really worrying about it. After that, in tourism, the term of climate change is they're not dealing with the term of climate change. Maybe after we discussing about sustainable tourism, but not is dealing with the climate change. And then it's after 2010 is we just a little bit discussing the term of climate change in tourism, but most of the tourism contents related to sustainable tourism and ecotourism. After COVID-19, they discuss European countries discussing sustainable tourism and green care tourism. After then in this perspective, I have to discuss today Jeju sustainable tourism, or how to increase the area of eco-tourist attractions, or how to reduce the number of visitors to Jeju. However, I wrote some of the PPT, like a presentation file about Jeju sustainable tourism, and then I was decided, do I have to write? Do I have to talk about it? Because I believe Jeju is not very implementing sustainable tourism, and I didn't want to really talk about this topic. After then, I decided, only 2 days before submitting presentation material to Daeyeon, and I have to introduce Udo, the impact of climate change in Udo, and how environment policy implementing in Udo. So my topic is today's my presentation topic is once more. Practicing carbon neutrality in Jeju tourism, the case of Udo. In the presentation, I talk about 3 things: climate change and tourism, and Jeju tourism, and Udo. In the case of Udo, I focus on the impact of tourism and impact of climate change, and some actions to implement climate change. According to UNEP, so many present are Kamaran and talk about what is climate change, the term, and I don't want to talk it. In tourism sector, tourism sector contributes to greenhouse gas emission to the extent of 8 to 10% globally. It's interesting. This one is recent report. They said 8 to 10%, but in 2005 they said 5%. So which means increasing in air transport, traveling a lot is the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emission is in transport. So in Ireland, 80% of total tourism carbon footprint comes from transport. Next graph says carbon dioxide emission in tourism sector is mostly air transport is 40%, and car 32%, and accommodation 21%. So, but we can't say you have to traveling, not a lot, we can't say that. But next time, I thought about what about tourists? What are the barriers they have to implement climate change action? So most of them say lack of climate change knowledge, uncertainty and skepticism, destruction in information source, externalizing responsibility and blame, technology will save us, reluctance to change lifestyle, fatalism, lack of political actions. Yeah, all of them. Some of them I have, and some of them you have. So we have to focus on this one. After then, I talking about Jeju tourism or 2 things, and then I focus on 2 things. One is the tourist perspective, one is air transport, and then also accommodation side. This graph is the number of visitors to Jeju from 1966 to 2023. In 1976, we had only 369,000 people. And then, when you see the 2000, Jeju has the total number of visitors to Jeju is 4 million. After then, it's in 2012, the total number of visitors to Jeju is 9.7 million people. What is the difference is very significantly increased like for about 16 years when you see the graph. And then those things I found like low-cost airlines. Because of low-cost airlines, the number of flights is increased and number of visitors is increased. And after then, is the number of visitors is rapidly decreased. As you know, this is COVID-19. After then, it's increased again. But when we had 2016, we had a sort of problems, and Jeju Island discussing like over tourism, and the amount of wastage increased. In the case of accommodations, the number of rooms and accommodation we said. And the last 5 years, I examined like last 5 years, and then find it out, increasing. As like in 2023, is the total number of accommodations in Jeju Island is 7,274. And what about rooms? Room is like the number of rooms is increased rapidly. And then in 2023, we had around 80,000 rooms in Jeju Island. Next graph is very interesting. When you see before graph, I said here, 2016, we had really, it's 1.6 million people. And then, so, I'm sorry. Here, between 2013 and 2016, the number of rooms increased 10,000. So which means really after 2016 is slowly increased, not a lot, but between for about 3 years. The number of rooms or number of hotels is increased rapidly. So after then, I can say Jeju tourism pursues sustainability. Actually, Jeju tourism pursues development rather than sustainability. So I can't exactly say sustainable tourism or eco-tourism in this presentation. After then, I try to find what do I have to introduce in this presentation. And then I thought about Udo. Udo is my hometown, and it's a small island. It's a tourist attraction, a very famous tourist attraction in Jeju. And it has a beautiful sceneries. When people said, when you see the Udo, it's a kind of example of Jeju. When you see the Udo tourism, they said they know about Jeju tourism. So very similar. And then Udo has got some problems, and Jeju Island has got problems. So Udo is located in the east of Jeju Island. The area is 6.18 square kilometers, farmland 63%, and forest is around 14%, other areas 23%. But 10 years ago, it was quite different. It's 10 years ago, farmland around 74%, and now it's 63%. And the length is from west to east is 2.5 kilometers, and south to north is 3.8 kilometers. And household is 862, and the population is around 16,000, 1,600 people. And they had like 12 villages. So when I talking about the effect of tourism, I have to talk about the number of visitors. When I explained 2016, as Jeju has 1.6 million people, the total number of visitors 1.6 million, and then now is Udo has 2.2 million. Around 2 million, sorry, 2 million. And Udo is 17. In 17, Udo has 2 million people, and now is like 1.4 million people. I'm so sorry for number. And then what they have like a negative effect of tourism, of course, economic benefits. Economic benefit is too sweet for Udo resident. And then they have like a population. So like the population is not decreasing in Udo, still it's maintaining around like 1,600. And also like it's resident feel, it's convenient, not very, it's like inconvenient. And then after that, it also like island atmosphere is lively during tourist coming time. But at night it is very quiet. But negative effect from Udo tourism is reducing the area of farmland and forest. And also increasing amount of waste and noise, of course. And then conflict among businesses. And the increase in incident of traffic accident. Now, I would like to talk about the climate change, the effect of climate change. I took this film last month when I visited Udo, and then at the time tide was high, and this one is Udo Port, near is village. The time is around 7 or 8 o'clock. It's a very common, not unusual thing. It's a very common in Udo. So the residents is facing this kind of problems, and then they experiencing they a little bit sometimes scared about it. And in 2016 we had this kind of things. After that they made this kind of wall. It's like a boundaries between sea and road. And the things, this prevented the seawater coming to on the road. But when this wall is also preventing from rainwater is draining into the sea. So it's when we had a heavy rain, the road becomes flooded. And see, I don't wanna, it's like, of course, like the effect of climate change in Udo is like rising sea level and flooding on the road, flooding heavy rain, and increasing the length of hot and humid weather, which means like I experience like when I go to his hometown in June, my house is like rooms are watering. So without air condition, and I don't want to get into my house. It's very humid and like can't sleep. And also like Udo exposure to the strong typhoon. And another thing is like declining the production of agriculture and marine product, especially like garlic, seaweed, and the Udo peanut. The things after that, like Udo, I think like Udo resident, I don't think Udo resident is government, make some kind of like improvement is climate change action. It's like using electronic transportation. The things in 2016, we had like the number of visitors is nearly 2 million, and then it's overcrowded in Udo, inside of Udo, like too many cars and too many people. So after then, like the government decided in 2017, they said they make some restriction. Dental cars can enter the Udo unless like accompanying with a disabled person or a child under 6 years old or elderly person over 65 years old. So because of that, transportation tourists must use electronic transportation on Udo. And then we had like electronic bus, electronic rental car, electronic bike, and electronic bicycle. Foreigners, because of they are not allowed to use is electronic. They can't rent like an electronic car or electronic bike. They use only like electronic bicycle. But domestic travelers, they use like this kind of things. However, when I think about like a carbon emission, like a carbon dioxide emission, the main transportation, like a ferry, is the great portion of carbon emission on the island, but they're not change it. They can't change it. But however, like they tried making some kind of short, like making operations, like like not operating a lot. Try to like making the number of operations they try to reduce it. Another action Udo has like a reduction to the amount of waste. Actually, when I researched this one, I was surprised. In my hometown, I never think about like we had like 3 tons, like rubbish. It's per day. So because of tourism, Udo produce like 3 tons, like waste like per every day, and 5 tons in tourist peak season. So we should reduce the amount of waste. So Udo has like most of like they said most of the Udo focus on like the reduction of disposable waste, such as like the cups from take-out coffee and teas. So because like the tourists stayed only 4 hours, around 4 hours a daily visit, only half a days, and then they can't get into the coffee shop to stay 1 hour, like inside the coffee shop. They often buy like a take-out coffee and tea. So because of that, they had like a disposable car. It's like a, disposable car like. So when I said like considering number of visitors like Udo per year is 1.5, which means they use like 1.5 million cups, and so the amount of disposable like waste is very serious. So Udo has like a practice like a 2040 plastic zero project. So the purpose of this project is to reduce the amount of disposable waste from coffee shop and fast food shops. This project started like 2 years ago, and then it's like a very quite effective, I think, because like they said like a little late 94%. And then is disposable reusable cups, like they use it. Reusable cups, they use it like some kind of festivals and like some religious events. After then, like they made like some kind of circulation systems. So which, because of that, like we had the effect of system, includes reducing carbon emission, creating jobs, and reducing amount of disposable disposable waste and saving money. I finally gonna say. And then after that, another action is the renewable energies. Actually, Udo doesn't have turbine like is the wind turbines. They actually had like solar energy, not wind turbine. They said like Udo residents said like wind turbine destroy the coastline views. They don't want to install. So they really considering. And then after that, like in my conclusion, I think like Udo's case is now have to extend to Jeju Island. Jeju Island doesn't have this kind of things at the moment for like in tourism perspective. And also when I look around Udo, any places doesn't talking about like the information, doesn't show like the information about climate change. And then it's other Jeju Island, Jeju tourist attraction as well. They didn't show, they didn't, explain anything about climate change and how to implement. We had to do so I think, so climate change for people, for tourists, we have to show what happened right now. And then we have to tell them we have to do environmental responsible activities now. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
I also thought deeply about what to present for the topic today, thinking about what is a meaningful topic to present about moving forward towards carbon neutral society, not just for Jeju, but for the world. So I'm going to discuss some of the mainstream responses to climate change and specifically policies drawing on natural capital approaches, particularly through the UN frameworks and various international organizations and the policy frameworks arising from agreements that have been agreed and in the future hopefully will be pursued further. So many of these draw upon natural capital approaches. Particularly, I am from the UK, and UK has embraced this concept perhaps more than other countries have, and so many of our responses draw upon natural capital as a concept. So I'm sure most people are familiar with this concept, but I'll just introduce first before moving into the specific policies. As with other forms of capital, it views nature as an asset. So the question is, how do we evaluate nature? How do we isolate nature? How do we calculate its value to us? That's the basic concept behind natural capital. And there are renewable and non-renewable forms of natural capital. The non-renewable forms of natural capital are those which are primarily responsible for carbon emissions, particularly fossil fuels. But then we have the renewable forms, which are often polluted through carbon emissions, such as watersheds and natural habitats and life itself. And this is the concept that underlies many of the main UN responses through the Paris Agreement, for example, to climate change. As you can see here, the UK has a natural capital committee which draws up recommendations for UK government, and they have been at the forefront of developing some of these policies. So why do we need to think about natural capital according to this approach? So the concept was developed because the problem with many responses to pollution, carbon emissions, was we are treating pollution as free, an externality which is not calculated within our business model, economic model. So the ideal is to evaluate that pollution and ensure that businesses incorporate that into their economic production. And so types of externalities include greenhouse gas emissions, of course, which contribute to carbon emissions. Also land use, which will affect how much our land, our natural resources can sequester carbon. Also other forms such as wheat farming, air pollutants, and all of these pollutants can be regarded as externality. So something which we haven't factored into our economic model to evaluate products. So it's like a free pollution which we are trying to place a value on, ensure that businesses truly are responsible for the damage to non-renewable and also renewable natural capital. And Dieter Helm is one of the UK experts on natural capital, and he says that once nature is viewed as a set of assets, this is controversial in fact, because we're viewing nature as something which is just has a monetary value. Later in the discussion, I'll look at some of the criticisms and how we can maybe look at Jeju moving forward without carbon neutral approach. But once nature is viewed as a set of assets, it can be valued in economic calculations. Valued assets are worth looking after. This is precisely what we are failing to do currently. So the idea was to look at how we can incorporate the pollution as a negative externality and put a value on it so that businesses, corporations, governments reduce that with the monetary incentive, market incentive, that will increase profits. One of the key ways this is done is through concept of ecosystem services, which have been brought up in various ways today through the other presentations. These are split into 4 types: provisioning services, regulating services, cultural services, and supporting services. And the difficulty is how to value these. How can we value these different services? How can we put a monetary value on something which is very difficult to isolate and calculate? But this is the job of policy to try and do that. And provisioning services, as you can see, include the products from our ecosystems. Regulation includes climate regulation, includes disease regulation, and then the difficulty with valuing is highlighted by cultural services. These are included as a natural asset, as a natural capital. Of course, how can we put a value on that? That's very difficult to do, but it is something which is attempted through various policies. And then supporting services, which are the cycles, the soil nutrient cycles, and the other nutrient cycles and primary production. So various mechanisms are used to try and calculate these. How much are these worth? How much damage are we doing through carbon emissions? What damage is that doing to our carbon, to our natural capital? And how can we put a price on pollution to ensure that we maintain the current value of our natural capital? As I mentioned, UK has been quite at the forefront, developing some policies relating to natural capital. We have the Natural Capital Committee, but it's been widely embraced by international organisations, WWF, for example, the World Bank as well, and various other organisations, including in Korea's own Master Plan for the Conservation of the Natural Environment. And this is generally the mainstreamed approach to fighting carbon emissions, as seen as perhaps the most effective way to combat carbon emissions, to ensure that we put a price on the pollution to the natural world, and as an incentive, a market incentive, to have that reduced. And a very illustrative phrase which is used by the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity is making nature's values visible. Perhaps we have not been aware of the values, and especially historical pollution was due to lack of visibility, lack of awareness of human impact on nature. And so by making that visible in a monetary form, in a market form, perhaps we can reduce that in the future moving forward. And there are various other policies which draw on this approach. Payments for ecosystem services, as I mentioned, the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, and also there's the RED framework, which is reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation in developing countries. This is widely disseminated through various international organisations and tends to be the mainstreamed approach to combating carbon emissions. As you can see, these projects here are quite broadly dispersed across the globe. There is Costa Rica here at the forefront of environmental policy, specifically in Central America, but also worldwide. Vietnam Emission Reductions Payments Agreement, Côte d'Ivoire, Premier Project, and Restoring Landscapes in South Africa. Many of these draw upon the concept that our natural capital can also be restored through activities. Not just about stopping degradation, but restoring what we have and increasing the value. In the same way we look after an asset, we might also think of nature as an asset that can be restored, and as land managers, we can look at people who work the landscapes as people who are stewards of the landscape, stewards of the natural environment, and hope that might give them an incentive to improve the land management and increase the natural capital through these various frameworks and policies. There's another way which natural capital is used to incentivize decreasing pollution, which is the polluter pays principle. And this is a more direct way. So instead of incentivizing through profit and hoping that producers will be disincentivized to pollute, the polluter pays principle more directly puts a penalty on production when it pollutes or when it emits carbon. So PPP reflects market incentives also in trying to make nature's values visible, but more directly through forms of penalty for producers when they emit carbon or when they produce products that are carbon intensive. This draws upon common but differentiated responsibilities principle, which goes back to the Earth Summit 1992 in Rio, Brazil, recognizing that we all have a responsibility for polluting the environment, but with different levels of responsibility. Perhaps developed countries have a historical responsibility towards for responsibility for emissions, and perhaps newly developed countries are less historically responsible, but we all have a responsibility through the current economic system. So in a way it can be seen as a form of economic reparation for historical emissions, but also for present producers to be incentivized to halt pollution, halt carbon emissions through forms of penalties. This is not yet part of customary law, it's not yet accepted worldwide, but it's becoming more accepted. Different forms of it are being developed and implemented worldwide. As it says here in the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, national authorities should endeavour to promote the internalisation of environmental costs. So it goes back to the externalities. How can we make them internal to production rather than external? And then the cost of that is reflected somehow in the production process, rather than currently where, or at least historically more so, that wasn't reflected in the cost or the production cost of an asset. So there are some examples of the PPP worldwide that can be drawn from treaties and agreements. As I mentioned, the Rio Declaration in spirit does include responsibility, a form of PPT, but also going through to the Paris Agreement, there are forms of the penalties for polluters as well, and all the way through to the Helsinki Principles, which was a coalition of finance ministers for climate action and the World Bank, about the responsibility of producers to be penalised for carbon emissions, for pollution, and degrading our natural capital. There are also forms of emissions trading systems which also draw upon this concept of penalising producers. So this is about putting a price on carbon to ensure that we internalise those emissions. How can we internalise the emissions through the economic system? Various forms of ETS are implemented worldwide. As you can see, the EU here was one of the earliest in 2005, but there are ETSs in development worldwide, and they have various scopes. They cover different greenhouse gases. So some have a very broad scope, some are quite narrow, some have protected industries that are outside the scope of the ETS. So they have varying degrees of effectiveness, but as a concept, it's more and more accepted, but not yet implemented fully and with different degrees of scope. So they're not yet covering all the emissions of the countries which have ETS. So this is a problem, of course, because they won't be able to halt carbon emissions to the degree required, but they are being implemented. So there's a lot of room for expansion and improvement, but they have been developed and accepted in principle. So that is an area to be positive about, but so far the scope is limited, especially in certain jurisdictions. And as you can see, the reduction targets also vary with different years, recognising different levels of development and different progress towards halting carbon emissions. And as I said, it's spreading worldwide as a concept. We have various ETSs in development, and some of these are further along than others, but we have them in development in Japan, in Vietnam, in Brazil, and in India as well. And as I mentioned, they have different sectors that are covered, so they're not going to cover all the sectors, and sometimes even the most polluting industries are not covered. Very often land use is not covered in ETSs, which leaves many questions open, because that often is one of the most polluting sectors So it's an area where there is a room for expansion. But as you can see, there is progress towards these, and they're being developed across the across the Asian region as well. And you can see, as I mentioned, the different level of development is reflected in targets. India here, net zero by 2070, whereas Japan targeting net zero by 2050. And another area which is becoming more implemented worldwide, following the EU's example, is the CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which also seeks to prevent carbon leakage, which is the problem whereby production is moved overseas because restrictions within one jurisdiction are tightened, meaning that producers move outside the jurisdiction where they are more free to pollute. So you might see European countries moving outside the European region to enable less restrictions. They can take advantage of looser restrictions on pollution. And this is also has the benefit of incentivizing cleaner production, but also giving cleaner jurisdictions an advantage in trade by enabling them to be more competitive. So this is one reason why this has been quite welcomed in various sectors where they might not necessarily always support tighter restriction. As you can see, the concept is that your product will be analyzed according to its carbon intensity. So if you import a product, you will need to have a certification of how much carbon was emitted during the production, and according to the level of carbon emissions, the carbon intensity of the product, you will have to pay a form of tariff. The importer pays the tariff, making the product less competitive in the domestic market, which gives an advantage to domestic producers who already produce according to a higher standard of environmental regulation. So this has the advantage of giving developed economies a competitive advantage over looser jurisdictions outside the domestic market, and so incentivizes companies staying within the domestic production jurisdiction. So it's quite attractive to the EU, and even in the United States there's some interest, even among Republicans who normally would oppose environmental regulations, some interest in developing a form of CBAM. So here you can see the EU CBAM very recently introduced. That is the first that has been developed worldwide. The UK might have one implemented from 2026. This is in development, and there has been a commitment towards it, but it hasn't been implemented. It hasn't entered into force yet. Over in North America, Canada also under consideration, potentially from 2026, and Australia, and even the US. As I mentioned, there is interest in developing CBAMs because they give a competitive advantage to domestic producers. So this act, I think, was introduced with backing from Republican politicians, which is relatively unusual in the States. This was supported as a form of protecting domestic industries because they have a cleaner production, and so their carbon intensity is lower than products produced elsewhere. Dieter Helm, again, he emphasizes how we shouldn't see this as a form of protectionism. We shouldn't see it as a form of giving advantage to domestic producers, but actually think of it as leveling the playing field and enabling domestic producers to produce according to the same standards as international producers. But on the other hand, we need to remember this will probably hit the competitiveness of producers in developing economies. And so there is a trade-off there where we might limit development in developing regions with these being developed in the developed world, such as the EU, such as the United States. So that will be something that needs to be considered about the ability of these to help the developing world develop through trade if we actually put up these barriers, especially for economies that haven't yet implemented strict environmental regulation. But having said talked about the positive potential of natural capital approaches, I'd also like to end by airing some caution about purely seeing nature, purely seeing pollution as an asset that we can value, that we can isolate, and that we can trade. Because we also need to think about other approaches, other values to carbon emissions. How can we lower carbon emissions? Can we just take a market approach? Can we just see nature as an asset that we can value in market terms? Or do we need to have a more holistic approach? Of course, normally we have a variety of values, variety of approaches. But there is a danger if we go too far towards a natural capital approach that we see nature almost purely in market terms. So I'd just like to spend a minute flagging some of the criticisms or alternative values that can drive our policy, our environmental policy, as mentioned with the previous presentation about Jeju's tourism policy. If we only take a market-oriented approach to creating a carbon-neutral society, we risk overdeveloping and pursuing forms of reckless development. So if we only look at nature as instrumental to our markets, to our economy, are we missing the other values? I would say we will be missing a variety of other values that nature actually has to us culturally, personally, even spiritually as well. Marketization, viewing nature as an exploitable resource, risks overlooking the other values we cherish, and that means that maybe we will pursue market-oriented solutions to things that are much deeper and much more meaningful to us that cannot be valued in market terms. Quantifying nature is also a problem. How can we quantify cultural services? If we see nature as providing cultural services to us, is that something that can be valued out within the market? Is that something that can be viewed in market terms, or is it something deeply personal, deeply cultural, even spiritual to each individual and culture? Jeju, of course, has a very deep cultural attachment to nature through its traditional belief systems, traditional lifestyles. How can you put a value on that in market terms? It's very difficult, and I would say it's not something that is helpful even. So it's important to consider these alternative value systems alongside any natural capital approach. So to finish with some maybe final points, just to think about how to seek, how to realise carbon neutral Jeju. I've used the term sacrality, the sacredness of nature. I use this very reservedly, but we all have a deep attachment to nature, I think, in different ways, and that cannot be valued easily in market terms. So viewing nature as something we should protect for its inherent worth, for its inherent value, is very important, alongside market-oriented approaches. As I said, the cultural significance of nature is not something we can value easily within these frameworks. Carbon emissions, if viewed only as a market externality, might limit our responses and how we can respond to climate change. We need that alongside a view that actually there is something sacred at some level about the earth and protecting it from pollution. Also, scarcity. We were talking about Udo Island and the over-tourism there, some problems of over-tourism in Jeju as a whole, and perhaps we can pursue scarcity, a premium, putting a premium on Jeju tourism. Maybe not viewing Jeju tourism as something we can exploit to the highest level possible, but maybe we can put a ring around how much we accept. Maybe we can put a cap on how many people come in. Maybe we can put a tax on people coming into the island, not just seeing it as something we can exploit and everyone can get a piece of the pie. Maybe we need to step backwards and think about, maybe we can maybe we can maintain something without mass tourism and putting an increased premium on Jeju as a tourism island through scarcity. It's a privilege to visit Jeju. It's a privilege to go to the Maldives. It's a privilege to visit these beautiful places. Maybe we've all become a bit spoiled traveling around the world. Okay, I'll finish with one more from Dieter Helm, who I've mentioned a few times already. Low-cost carriers, of course, we all use them, so it's not like this is an individual responsibility. I think it's a government responsibility to actually implement policies. Individual consumers shouldn't be blamed. We all take advantage of cheap air flights. Maybe we could do less, but it's not going to solve climate change individually. It needs the government to do that. But there are some things that are artificially cheap, such as flights, such as consumption. So maybe in the future, it's not going to be a choice. Things are going to be more expensive because resources will become scarcer. Production will increase in price. Energy will become more expensive. So we need to accept that, and maybe we can do that preemptively and accept that maybe we can scale back consumption. And tourism is probably the best example of that. Tourism, I think, is something which we really all appreciate, but maybe we enjoy a bit too much. Maybe I'm biased. I live in Jeju, so I see the damage being done. So okay. I'm being told to shut up. So thank you very much for listening. I hope this gives something to think about, and I look forward to any questions. And thank you once more.
마지막 파트로 종합 토론을 시작을 하도록 하겠습니다.
일단 제주도 같은 경우에 지금 기후위기 상황이 거의 재난 상황이다라는 거는 뉴스로 다 접하실 거라고 생각합니다. 최근에 평균 기온만 폭염 일수만 보더라도 지금 30년 평균이 3.91이었는데 최근 10년 평균이 7.73일로 늘었다가 올해는 21.31, 제주도 서귀포시 다 포함인데요. 평균 된 건데 그만큼 지금 늘어나 있는 상태입니다. 그러니까 사실상 이 임계점을 넘어서지 않았느냐라는 우려가 지금 나오는 상황이고요. 열대야부터 시작해서 지금 고수온 경보 일수 같은 경우에도 좀 최대치를 지금 기록하고 있는 상황인데 이 때문에 지금 농민들이나 어민들이나 굉장히 많은 어려움에 처해 있다라는 내용은 다들 아시리라 생각합니다. 제가 도둑동의 해녀분들 만나가지고 인터뷰를 했을 때 해녀분들이 했던 얘기가 태풍이 안 와서 바다가 누렇다고 얘기를 했습니다. 이게 무슨 뜻이냐면 오염물질이 계속 축적되면서 순환이 안 돼서 태풍이 오든 뭐가 오든 간에 어쨌든 간에 바다가 한번 뒤집어져야 되는데 이것이 안 일어나면서 그렇게 해서 오염물질이 누적되어 있어서 바다가 누렇다, 색깔이 없다라고 얘기를 한 적이 있습니다. 그 내용 안에 사실 제주도의 모든 문제가 다 담겨져 있다고 생각을 하고요. 그만큼 굉장히 심각한 상황인데, 그래서 오늘 이제 푸마란 교수님 등이 이제 시민사회 역할 이런 부분 좀 얘기를 해주셔서 거기 얘기를 듣다가 제가 시민사회 약간 변명 아닌 변명을 좀 해야 될 것 같아서 얘기를 드리면, 어쨌든 저희가 민간 거버넌스나 이런 부분에 있어서 안 하려는 건 절대 아닙니다. 저희가 거부한다거나 아니면 그거에 대해서 터부시한다거나 이런 부분은 절대 아니고 민간 거버넌스를 정말 열심히 해야 된다라고 정책 제안을 하고 있는 중입니다. 그런데 이런 거죠. 이를테면 올해 같은 경우 연산호가 녹고 있다. 제주도의 경산호가 이제 최후의 이제 피난처라고 얘기되는데 이제 백화 현상이 일어나고 있다. 이런 얘기가 조사되고 내용이 나오고 이슈 브리프가 나오고 정책 브리프가 나옵니다. 거기에는 항상 들어가는 얘기가 뭐냐면 이런 정책들을 제대로 반영할 수 있도록 우리 민간 거버넌스 제대로 해봅시다 라는 내용들이 들어갑니다. 그런 얘기를 저희가 하루 이틀 하느냐? 아니죠. 굉장히 오랫동안 해온 얘기입니다. 하지만 민간 거버넌스에 대해서 이제까지 제대로 된 적이 있냐? 없습니다. 지금 제주도 같은 경우에 기후위기와 관련해서 법정 최상위 기구가 다 아시다시피 제주도 탄소중립 녹색성장 위원회가 있죠. 그 위원회 같은 경우에도 사실상 시민단체 TO가 거의 제가 알기로는 진짜 기후위기에 관련해 대응하고 있는 TO도 한 명밖에 없습니다. 그 많은 사람 중에 실제로 시민사회를 대표해서 나온 사람 한 명입니다. 그리고 제가 거기 위원 조처가 있는데요. 제가 담당이 기후위기와 에너지가 주 종목이거든요. 전문 분야 그 분야인데 제가 들어가 있는 분야가 녹색 생활 환경 분과입니다. 그러니까 시민 실천과 뭐 이런 등등을 하고 있는 곳이죠. 근데 저는 그것보다 뭐 재생에너지 보급이라든가 기후에 관련된 정책 제안이라든가 이런 쪽에 특화된 사람이거든요. 그러니까 이게 지금 도에서, 그러니까 제주도나 정부에서 민간 거버넌스를 어떻게 바라보고 있느냐가 명확히 드러나는 거죠. 그러니까 에너지와 기후변화 전문가 집단이 하는 것이고 시민단체는 시민 실천에 관련된 내용만 계속해라 라는 것들이 지금 뭐 드러나고 있다라고 보여지고요. 뭐 이런 부분들 때문에 사실 제대로 된 대화가 안 되는 부분이 있습니다. 그러니까 말 그대로 우리는 시민 실천을 위해서 정부나 아니면 지방정부가 얘기하고 싶은 게 아니라 정말 중요한 부분들, 특히 지금 뭐 재생에너지 보급이든 기후위기 대응이든 최근에 또 해양과 관련된 여러 가지 문제든 관련해서 굉장히 많은 정책들을 내놓고 그에 대해서 얘기하고 그에 따라서 정책이 받아들여질 수 있도록 민간 거버넌스를 하고 싶은데 그 부분들이 사실 많이 막혀있는 게 현실입니다. 그래서 저희가 100번은 정도를 제안을 하면 두세 개가 뭐 반영이 될까 말까 한 게 현실인 것이죠. 그렇기 때문에 저희가 맨날 열심히 한다고 하지만 그런 부분이 있는 거고요. 그리고 자원도 사실 많이 부족합니다. 저희가 뭐 돈이 있는 것도 아니고 인력이 있는 것도 아니고 있는 예산 없는 인력 갖고 지금 이렇게 꾸려오는 것이고 시민사회 간의 연대가 부족하다는 부분 뭐 물론 일견 맞는 말씀입니다만 또 분야가 다르고 같이 연대할 수 있는 분야가 또 한정되어 있는 것도 사실입니다. 기후위기라는 큰 위기가 있지만 그 안에서 담당하는 분야가 다르기 때문에 함께 할 수 있는 것도 있고 없는 것도 분명히 존재합니다. 그리고 생각하는 방향이 모두 다 똑같이 갈 수는 없는 부분이어서 그런 부분도 있고요. 뭐 이런저런 부분 때문에 사실 여러 난맥상이 있다. 그래서 저희가 노력하는 만큼의 성과가 안 나오고 있다라는 부분 말씀.
I just want to say that I'm honored to be included in something which is clearly important, not just to Jeju but the world. And I know that there are great minds here. I just have a couple of questions that I thought might help maybe add some clarity to the conversations and the presentations that you shared today. Of course, I'm not sure if there's an answer for these questions, so forgive me. Actually, if I mispronounce your name, please forgive me.
Dorsaf.
From looking at your slides, I learned about something I didn't even know about blue carbon ecosystems. The idea of planting mangrove trees in Jeju is such an exciting and challenging one, I think. And I just wonder, as was mentioned also, again, how we need to look at Jeju as a potential place to create more of a blue carbon awareness, or the world should have more blue carbon awareness. Since it's such a significant portion of carbon capture, how come maybe I learned about the rainforest in 5th grade, I learned about forests over and over again. Why do you think blue carbon is missing from the discussion in the general public? Maybe I'll just pose my questions, and if you have time, some of you can answer them. For Darren, I love this idea of capping tourism in Jeju, creating sort of a scarcity. And we can see this has happened with Halasan already. To go to Baekmokdam, to the summit of Halasan, you now need to sign up, and there is a cap. That idea is very appealing to me, but I don't feel like it could be so easy to do so, especially considering a new airport being built and increasing cruise tourism. So I would ask you what your thoughts are on this and how we could actually make it happen.
Yes.
Kang Eun-jung. I love Udo, and I love the idea of protecting Jeju, especially Udo. I'm aware that switching to electric vehicles is a step, but even as you mentioned, a lot of Udo uses solar power, but does that solar power charge the electric vehicles there? And if not, so then what are some other steps that we might take to help mitigate the problems with the ferry causing pollution or other forms of energy use? Again, forgive me if I mispronounce your name, Muthusamy?
Close enough.
Kumara. What are the things that we can do in this room? Everybody's aware it does take government. Darren said it's a government thing. It should be a big business thing, of course, but I don't want to leave here today feeling like, okay, they'll figure it out. Let other people worry about it. So what are the things that everybody here can do? Something tangible, in your opinion. What can we do as we leave here today, in the next days and weeks, to help this vision of a better future become a reality? And finally, Cha Eun-jung. Hi. I'm very curious about this. The idea of storms is terrifying for those of us living in coastal areas. And so as things do get worse and worse around the world, what do you think we can do in our communities to prepare or even mitigate these problems? And thank you, everyone.
우선 질문부터 먼저 하자면 드루샤프 케르파이 드루샤프 케르파이 교수님께는 제주도의 맹그로브 숲이 과연 할 것인가 그것을 물론 연구를 하고 있다고는 들었습니다만은 실제 그것이 제주도에 가능한 것인지에 대한 의견을 한 번 더 여쭙고 싶고요. 또 아까 이제 가렌 사우스코트 박사님께는 우리 제주도의 이제 탄소 중립을 향해서 입도하는 관광객을 제한하면 희소성을 통해서 가치를 더할 수 있다 이렇게 말씀하셨는데 이것이 우리 제주도 내에서 그런 주장을 과연 뭐 이렇게 타협할 수 있는 점이 있을 것인가. 지금 더 많은 관광객 들어오도록 만들기 위해서 제2공원까지 주장하시는 분들도 있고 물론 반대도 합니다만은 그거와 어떻게 가능한가 하는 이런 생각이 좀 들어졌고요. 그 다음에 이 생태계 서비스 지불제라는 이 부분이 제주도 내에 조례로 지금 제정이 돼서 시행이 되고 있는데 이걸 알고 계신지 그런 얘기를 좀 드리고 싶고요. 그 다음에 오염자 부담 원칙과 배출권 거래제 이렇게 참 좋은 주제들을 이렇게 말씀을 해주셨는데 실제 우리나라와 우리 제주도 내에 이것을 접목시켜서 할 수 있는 부분들은 어떤 그 생각이 있다면 힌트라도 좀 말씀해 주시면 좋겠습니다. 우선 그 정도 말씀드리고 제 생각을 좀 말씀드리겠습니다. 저는 아까 생태계 서비스 지불제에 대한 내용을 그거와 그 다음에 오염자 부담이라든지 배출권 거래제 이 부분에 대해서 저는 어떻게 생각을 하고 있냐면요. 시장이 실패되어 있는 그 부분을 다시 시장으로 돌려놔서 끌어가려고 하는 것은 매우 어려울 것이다. 가령 다시는 아실 수도 있는 내용이지만 호우즈라는 경제학자가 호우즈 정리 얘기를 하면서 자원배분이 잘 안 이루어질 때에 재산권이라든지 아니면 협상을 할 수 있는 여지를 잘 만들어 놓으면 이런 시장 실패에 대한 부분도 이런 배출권 거래제라든지 등등을 통해서 오염원을 일으킨 사람에게 부과도 해주고 이럴 수 있을 것이다라는 그런 시장주의의 논리를 얘기를 해서 지금도 흐름이 그쪽으로 많이 가고 있는데 저는 좀 부정적인 생각을 가지고 있습니다. 이거는 정부가 개입이 돼서 강한 규제의 부분이 필요한 영역이다. 그렇게 지금 생각을 가지고 있고 그리고 또 뭐 다 아시는 내용이겠지만은 그 외부 경제가 이루어져 있을 때에 그때에 이 사회에서 필요한 것들을 정부가 더 지원해줘서 더 많이 이 사회에서 요구되는 만큼의 생산이 되고 공급이 될 수 있도록 해주고, 이 사회에 필요치 않는 공해라든지 이런 것에 대해서는 강한 규제책을 주어져서 그들에게 오히려 책임을 부과시켜 나가는, 이것을 통해 가지고 이 사회에서 필요한 것보다 더 많이 배출되는 것, 생산되는 것, 이것을 줄여나가도록 강제할 수 있을 수밖에 없지 않느냐, 저는 그런 생각을 좀 가졌습니다. 그래서 제주도에서도 생태계 서비스 지불제라는 것을 지금 도입을 했는데요. 그래서 이 부분들이 더 활성화될 수 있도록 정책들을 더 만들어냈으면 좋겠다. 그래서 이제 뭐 우리 재산권들이 괜히 침해되고 있다라는, 이렇게 되지 않도록, 그것으로 인해서 생기는 아까 자연 자산들이, 자본들이 이제 도움이 되고 그것으로도 유지가 될 수 있는 정도로 지원책들을 좀 더 많이 제주도에서 만들어내야 되지 않느냐.
우선 제주도의 탄소 중립을 위해서 오늘 귀중한 말씀을 해주신 기조 강연자인 쿠마란 교수님하고 네 분의 전문가분들께 감사 인사를 드립니다. 저는 이제 세 분께 질문 사항이 있는데요. 처음으로는 이제 기조 강연을 해주신 쿠마란 교수님께 질문 사항이 있습니다. 환경단체가 탄소 중립을 위해서 다양한 역할을 하고 책임을 가지고 있는데요. 그래서 이제 그 역할에 대해서 잘 설명을 해 주셨는데, 이렇게 되어 있는 이론적인 부분을 실제 우리가 현장에 적용하기 위해는 굉장히 어려울 것 같습니다. 그래서 정리해 주신 다양한 그 방안 중에서 제주도가 실천할 수 있는 가장 손쉬운, 가장 효과가 좋은 그 방안은 무엇인지, 그 우선순위에 대해서 한번 질문을 해보고 싶습니다. 그리고 이제 두 번째 질문은 그 케르파이 교수님께 제가 질문이 있는데요. 지금 블루카본이라는 오늘 그 맹글로브에 대해서 잘 설명을 해주셨고, 그 부분이 굉장히 많이 와 닿았습니다. 근데 이제 2022년에 제주도가 2050년 탄소 중립을 위한 대책 방안을 마련을 했는데요. 그 대응 계획 안에는 블루카본에 대한 전략이 포함이 되어 있지 않습니다. 그래서 옆에 이제 그 송창권 토론자님께서도 설명을 질문을 해드렸듯이, 저도 같은 맥락에서 제주도가 이렇게 블루카본을 이용을 해서 탄소를 저감하기 위한 방법이 정말 실현이 가능한 건지, 네, 그 부분에 대해서 가능성과 또 적용을 하게 되면 어떤 방안이 있는지 또 궁금해서 그 부분에 대해서 이제 질문을 드리고요. 마지막으로 사우스코트 교수님께 질문이 있는데요. 탄소 중립의 목표를 실현하기 위해서 지금 하고 있는 배출권 거래제는 굉장히 이제 중요한 부분이고, 선진국들에서도 많이 이제 관심을 갖고 있는 정책인데요. 우리나라에서는, 대한민국에서는 2015년에 온실가스 거래제를 이제 도입되고 나서 국내 배출권 가격이 이제 하락되는 추세를 보여가지고, 이 배출권 가격이 미래의 변화를 반영하지 못하고 굉장히 낮게 책정이 되어서, 이 참여하는 업체들이 내가 그러면은 얘한테 투자를 하고, 시설 투자를 하고 내가 감축을 해야겠다는 생각보다 배출권을 사가지고 와서 그냥 쓰는 게 훨씬 이득이 되겠다 해서 그 구매하는 방식을 선택하는 경우가 많습니다. 그래서 이제 탄소 배출권 거래제가 제주도뿐만이 아니라 이제 대한민국 전체에 어떻게 잘 정착하기 위한 구체적인 방안이 있는지에 대해서 질문해보고 싶습니다.
제주도청에서 산업육성과 기업지원을 담당하고 있지만, 오늘 이 자리에서는 제 담당 업무로 나온 게 아니라 우리 좌장인 정재현 교수님으로부터 20년 전부터 제가 약 20년 전에 이제 환경사회학을 배우면서 자연과 사회의 관계에 대해서 탐구하고 실천하면서 그런 내용들을 한 고민들을 좀 풀어보고자 왔습니다. 보통은 이런 자리에서 이제 뭐 의원님도 오셨지만 이제 행정기관에서는 이제 담당 부서에서 와야 되는데, 우리 이제 환경정책반은 이제 좀 더 큰 규모의 이제 사업을 하다 보니까 오늘 못 오신 것 같고, 특히 환경과 관련해서 이제 제가 하는 일이 예전에 이제 환경운동을 할 때 우리 오늘 김정도 국장님도 오셨지만 아까 이제 송창건 의원님께서도 말씀하셨다시피 환경 문제, 더 크게는 이제 기후위기의 원인을 이제 자본의 이윤 추구를 위한 산업 문제 때문에 발생한 온실가스 배출이 원인이다라고 이제 얘기를 하면서 이 산업 활동에 대해서 상당히 부정적인 생각을 가졌습니다. 뭐 지금도 이제 그런 이제 경향성은 계속 남아 있어가지고 쉽게 바뀌진 않는데 지금 하고 있는 일이 이제 산업 육성, 기업 지원이다 보니까 과연 이런 일을 통해서 현재 우리가 겪고 있는 기후위기, 더 나아가서는 이제 자연과 사회의 관계의 뒤틀림을 어떻게 다시 원상태로 회복을 할 것인가 이런 고민을 하면서 일을 하고 있습니다. 오늘 아침에 제가 오면서 신문을 보니까 그런 얘기가 나왔는데 이제 다음 달이면 또 유엔 기후변화 협약 총회가 있고 앞서 가지고 이제 세계 기상기구가 자료를 발표했는데 온실가스는 계속 이제 늘어나고 있고 2030년까지, 그러니까 2050년까지 탄소 중립을 해야 되고 중간 목표로서 우리나라는 2030년까지 지금 6년밖에 안 남았지만 이제 5년밖에 안 남았죠. 이제 그때까지 한 40%를 감축해야 되는데 전 세계가 약속한 탄소 중립 이 실천 사례들을 정리해 보면 40%는커녕 2.6%밖에 안 된다라는 기사가 오늘 아침에 이제 눈길을 끌었습니다. 우리는 그동안 열심히 기후위기 극복을 위해서 같이 모이고 활동하고 뭐 행진도 하고 개별적인 실천을 하고 있지만 아직까지도 많이 부족한 상황인 것 같습니다. 그런 점에서 이게 그러니까 쉽게 안 바뀌는 거잖아요. 이제 결국 이제 체제의 관성이 있다 보니까 그거를 확 바뀌기 전까지는 이제 너무 어려운 상황인데 그렇다면 그런 이제 온실가스를 다 배출하는 이 구조적인 관성을 어떻게 바꿔낼 것인가? 이게 하나가 고민이고 그런 점에서 이제 현대 사회를 이제 이끌어가는 주요한 세력 중에 하나가 실은 자본이기 때문에 시장의 힘을 활용해서 기후 위기를 극복을 하자라는 주장이 예전부터 있어왔고 이게 현재 이제 기후변화 협약에 따른 여러 가지 감축 수단에 시장 계제가 도입된 요인이라고 저는 보고 있습니다. 그런 점에서 오늘 발표하신 분들 많은 이야기들을 뭐 이제 환경 운동의 측면에서도 또 이제 정책의 측면에서도 이제 또 여러 가지 이제 관광의 측면에서 말씀을 하셨는데 제가 이제 고민하고 있는 것들 한 가지 질문을 드리겠습니다. 이제 오늘 오전에 우리 제주도가 이제 기후테크 기업이라고 이제 기후 위기를 해결하기 위한 이제 초기 창업 기업인 스타트업 한 30개사와 같이 업무 협약을 체결했습니다. 근데 이게 이제 아까 제가 앞서 얘기한 이 기업이 온실가스를 다 배출하면서 기후위기의 가장 핵심적인 주범인데 또 이제 기업과 시장의 힘을 통해 가지고 기후위기를 극복하기 위한 방안들이 과연 이제 논리적으로는 잘 언뜻 들으면 이해가 안 되지만 실제 그런 것들이 효과를 볼 것인지 아니면 효과를 보려면 어떻게 해야 되는 것인지 혹시 이 각각이 처한 곳에서 그런 고민들을 하고 있는지 그런 동향이라든지 또는 개인적인 의견을 말씀해 주시면 좋을 것 같습니다. 한 가지 예를 들어서 오늘 블루카본 만개로브 말씀을 해주셨는데 몇 달 전에 기후테크 중에 이제 지오테크라고 있습니다. 인공위성 하는 업체가 저를 찾아와서 이제 카리브해에서 이제 대규모 해초류를 양식을 하면서 이게 온실가스를 흡수하고 이게 실제 기후변화 협약에 따른 감축 수단으로 인정받기 위해서 측정을 해야 되는데 그거를 한번 제주도에서 실증을 해보겠다고 찾아왔어요. 실제 이 기업은 이제 수백억의 투자도 받았고 그렇게 막 하고 있는 거예요. 근데 제가 지금까지 생각해보니 20년째 환경운동을 하고 그러니까 13년째 환경운동을 하고 있는 김정도 국장님이 투자받은 돈은 과연 1억이나 될까? 그러니까 생각해보니까 참 격차가 크게 느껴지는데 그래서 한번 물어보고자 이제 합니다. 기후테크 또는 이제 기후 관련된 산업 시장이 현재 이제 벌어지고 있는 기후 위기를 잘 해결할 것인지 또는 이제 잘 해결하기 위해서 어떤 점을 우리가 바라봐야 되는지 그게 궁금합니다.
Capture question. Carbon capture. There are some practices, best practices, but I'm loud. Carbon capture is very expensive. There are best practices on carbon capture, but it is not scalable. Come to think of it, developing carbon sinks are also synthetic applications are available, but once again, very, very expensive. Instead of the easy way to do it is plant trees. That's why I gave the example of the NGO, how they simply plant trees. And the earlier speaker, she was talking about mangroves. Mangroves absorb carbon like more than anything else. So there are easy solutions. Yes, we have to do research on carbon capture and artificial carbon sink processes, but while we have so many natural opportunities, let's not destroy the forest, number one. Second, try to plant trees. So there are cheaper and scalable opportunities than going after expensive carbon capture and synthetic creation of carbon sink and so on and so on. But you are right, it has to be explored. That's the future, but we are not ready there yet.
So for many years actually, so it has been focused mainly on forests, on terrestrial so ecosystem, and so the aquatic ecosystem, so they have been neglected. So there is lack of awareness and so research about this blue carbon ecosystem, and so mainly it's because actually it's difficult to access so this ecosystem. So they were underestimated also because, as I said, they cover just a small area compared to the forest. So that's why most people, they focus on the forest. And so in normal people, you can see change in the forest, but not in the sea. So it's difficult so to monitor and to explore. So this is one of the challenge that why there is no actually attention paid to the blue carbon before. So in order so to overcome so this gap, so it's we can use research, which is important, and also through funding and collaboration between different actually people. And so regarding the mangrove, actually when Professor John told me to make presentation, so for me I thought about blue carbon, so and I wanted to search about Jeju. So and I found that that article that there was an event and they want actually to implant so mangroves in Jeju. Also for me it was a little bit so challenging because of the climate in Jeju, so it's not actually favorable for mangroves. So mangroves, they need tropical climate, and it's not the case for Jeju. So the climate is temperate, and also the sea water is cooler. So also I think it's challenging. So but we can find actually other ways, like giving more attention to the other blue carbon, so like the salt marshes, so which can grow actually in Jeju, and also for example. Conserving the coastal ecosystem, so like for example planting the native plants to protect the ecosystem, so it's a way actually to capture the carbon, and so making the green infrastructure, and also conserving like the seagrass, which are actually found in Jeju, so seagrass and the kelp forest, so these are also, they capture the carbon. So we can actually adapt this ecosystem that can grow or are found in Jeju, so to capture the carbon.
Questions first to Jason. I think that's a very important point. How can Jeju limit tourism or add value rather to tourism while expanding the tourism infrastructure such as second airport, cruise ships as well, expanding in the long term? I think that is the tension that we're trying to address. How can we sustain the current level of growth? And if I look at the current level of tourism in Jeju Island, it seems to me that we have enough tourism to actually sustainably develop and ensure that those profits go to the whole community. That's why I think a form of tourism tax or a cap will enable us to sustain tourism. Is that compatible with a second airport? Personally, I don't think so. I think that's a simple answer, no. That's the problem, I think. But perhaps a decision has been made at the national level, and it's up to islanders in positions of power to maybe put that argument strongly forward that this is not a sustainable future. But maybe we still need to cap tourism with the second airport, because at least we can manage extra tourists coming by saying we're not expanding exponentially. We need to at least have a vision. Where do we want to go? Do we just want to keep going up? Where's the end point? Reach consensus. I'll briefly, an anecdote from when I did some research relating to the national park, which was opposed Initially, when the Jeju National Park was proposed, there was widespread opposition from villagers who were worried about their ability to develop. But once the point was made through workshops, through education, through awareness, the level of consensus increased once there was the forthright argument in favour of the national park. Over time, people changed their opinion. Still, it failed eventually, but I think there needs to be a much more forthright, stronger argument from government about why we need to push forward some policies. Consensus at this stage looks really impossible because the argument is not made strongly enough, maybe. So maybe there's need for even stronger arguments about why these policies are needed, and that's everyone's responsibilities, civil society and government as well. The ETS, I don't have enough personal knowledge of the Korean ETS system to answer Ms. Lee's question, I'm afraid, but I do agree that there needs to be more forthright, stronger policies in this area. I know about the plastic, Jeju Zero Plastic 2040 policy. It's a good example of a policy which relies a bit too much on voluntarism and recycling and improving the waste system without putting some restrictions on producers. Because Jeju is reliant on a bottled water industry, there's a reluctance to put some limits on the producer relying on waste management, which alone won't solve that problem. I hope that addresses the questions in the brief time.
I think it's very hard. Like the government policy increase electronic transportations, and they don't have making energies. Like the renewable energy is not enough, and but it's like they said, it's like you said some other examples using in power is transportation. Actually, they tried, but it's not. It's profitable because it's not profitable because it's to find hard people to work. And also, businesses is not profitable. That's why we use technologies. So also, people doesn't wanna change their lifestyles.
Okay, Jason. Okay, thank you. So I think first of all, thank you very much for your suggestions. I think the policymakers and governmental officers should be studied themselves. They understand the nature of the tropical cyclone. So what is the cause of the intensify is likely in recent years. So also they make, in the basis of their study, they should make a plan. It's a short and long term. So for example, the short term is study the training course for the students or civilization citizens, for example, and what is the nature and why they increase in recent years. Also, they build up the shelter from the escape from the time when they approach the Jeju Island. And the more long point of the view, they strengthen the capacity building for the expert, especially the meteorologists and the scientists, and introduce a new technology for the artificial intelligence. How can you predict the cycles? Yeah, this is the answer to you. This is not done. I'm sorry, I have a question to the Mr. Kim. Mr. Kim, 위성 말씀하셨죠? 위성. 근데 우리나라에서 운영되는 위성이 굉장히 많거든요. 지오 새틀라이트에서 정치궤도 위성. 근데 그 찾아오셨다는 업체가 어떤 업체인지 나중에 얘기를 해주시면 답변이 될 것 같아요. 왜냐면 환경부나 국토부나 이런 데서 그런 사업을 가지고 오시는 기업들이 되게 많으세요. 그래서 그런 부분들은 이제 정부나 지역이나 다 같이 해서 발표를 좀, 그러니까 같은 어떻게 사업을 해서 민간이 활용할 수 있는지 같이 고민을 해야 될 것 같고요. 총중이 IPCC 말씀해 주신 거는 개인적으로 한번 말씀드리도록 하겠습니다. Thank you.
종합을 해보면은 탄소 중립의 개념이 무엇인가도 발표가 되었고, 그 다음에는 이것을 달성을 하기 위한 방법이 어떤 것인가를 모든 분들이 다 이 얘기를, 토론자들도 부분적으로 말씀을 하셨고 발표하시는 분들도 그렇습니다. 그래서 토론자님들이 얘기하신 것, 달성 방법, 발표자들이 발표 내용에 담은 것들을 종합을 해보면은 이 달성을 위해서는 개인이냐 기업체나 NGO나 정부나 각자 역할이 다르다라는 걸 담았었고요. 그 다음에는 이 구체적인 달성 방법으로는 탄소 흡수다, 육상 부분이나 해상에서 탄소 흡수라는 자연에 기초한 방법을 제시를 한 분들도 계시고, 그 다음에 이 에너지 효율성을 증대를 한다, 또 탄소를 저장을 한다, 격리한다, 포집한다라는 기술론적 접근을 달성 방법으로 제시한 내용들도 있었고요. 또 더 거시적으로는 현재 사회경제 체제가 탄소 배출의 기본 원인이기 때문에 사회경제 체제론적으로 접근을 할 필요가 있다는 내용들도 담겨 있었습니다.